Hey everybody. Okay, so sorry for my audio issues in my past video. I'm going to see if I can fix those for this video. I don't know what the deal was there. Anyways, what does that have to do with this video? Nothing. But the last video I did was about Monet and Claude Monet and his water lilies paintings. And so now today, let's watch another Monet video. This is less art history, more art technique. And we're going to see from this, let's see, this person named National Gallery of Art. I don't think that's their real name, but let's see. There is a... Oh, the description doesn't say who's going to be talking during this video, but from the National Gallery of Art YouTube channel, there's a video on Monet's palette, which would be his colors, and his technique. So I would love to watch this and see how the Impressionist painted and what his techniques were. So let's dive into that and get rolling.
Monet bought this water lily pond after he bought the farm over there. So this was
okay. Now, I thought he was going to make a joke after he bought the farm. That's a joke about, or that's a figure of speech about dying, which isn't right, isn't it? Anyways, sorry. He wouldn't have made that joke. That's where my mind is at right now.
Lily pond after he bought the farm over there. So
purchase the like use different words. Purchase the farm. Bought the farm. Come on.
Lily pond after he bought the farm over there. So this was a late addition. In fact, this pond is part of the Ept River. Gives it a sense of motion and life. And that's the motion and life he wants to put into his paintings. I've picked a bigger horizontal format.
Okay, has anybody ever listened to How Did This Get Made or watch any of Paul Scheer? There's a comedian named Paul Scheer, and this guy is reminding me a lot of Paul Scheer. He's been on Parks and Rec and The League. He was on The League. This guy totally reminds me of him.
Wants to put into his paintings. I've picked a bigger horizontal format. Now this would be like a miniature Monet water lily painting.
Yeah.
The way to begin this is the way Monet began. Loose sketching. And he starts his sketches here, but he paints them in a studio over there. Now I'm going to rub in some color. His painting process takes a long time. He does one sitting, walks away, works for about an hour. But he needed the oil paints to dry to keep building up the layers. I'm only going to be doing this at one sitting with you, blurring in colors first. Let me show you the palette.
So I mentioned in the previous video, Great Art Explained, Monet's water lilies. The narrator there mentioned that Monet didn't paint with blending his paints. The fact is he did. Early on especially, he could blend paints and blur in the sort of the tones, the general tones of his paintings, and then he'd add paint on top of all that. So we're going to see how this guy works.
Use some cobalt blue, 1810, that's when this color comes in. Cadmium yellow, which was a new color. This is alizarin crimson, which is like a carmine. And if I make a deep violet out of this, I can create a condition of simultaneous contrast. The yellow is stronger because the violet is next to it. They're opposite colors on the color wheel. The other issue is called successive contrast. If I take this dark color and I make a dark square out of it, now I'm going to do the same thing with yellow right beside it. That light looks brighter than that light because the contrast level is greater here than it is here. That's successive contrast. Let's get that synthetic.
Another term for that, I think, is simultaneous contrast. Just went over this in my color theory class, actually.
Ultramarine blue, some brilliant rose, emerald green, copper-based azurite blue, hooker's green. Here goes some violet. So I'm going to look out to immerse myself in the experience. That's how you paint this kind of painting. I admired his inversion of ideas. So I could put the sky at the bottom by reflection, turning the world upside down. The idea of the floating world is something that he inherits from Japan in the woodblocks. I'll borrow some of that ultramarine blue and then a little bit of that green. Watching him paint, people said, I only see a mess, I see chaos. It's just a slow development of something that shows the feeling, not a copying of a scene. That's the universe, life out of chaos. He's really confident of his brushstrokes. He's not going to hesitate. That self-assurance is communicated to us as looser and freer strokes. He's thinking about a design very covertly.
Now, I wonder if people, if this is just something you can do, if you go to Giverny, if you can just go take a section of space there and do a plein air painting yourself. I don't know. That'd be interesting. Now, he mentions here sort of form out of chaos, that Monet is just kind of creating a design covertly, I think is what he says.
He's thinking about a design very covertly.
And in a sense, he is, but it's very possible that he had it laid out in his head as he's looking at things, and then just establishing it covertly where it's just sort of building up over time. Kind of like he mentioned earlier. Monet most likely had this sort of general composition figured out, and then would start to bring in the details, and that would bring it to life.
It's very subtle, but it's there so the brain can read space. There's no horizon. And to the white. I can't make tints without white. These tubes really liberated painters. So we have pre-stretched canvases, portable easels. This made the advent of Impressionism and the portable landscape painter possible. You may not see this. I'm squinting like this at the canvas. Squint, kind of a Clint Eastwood style squint. And the reason for that is it puts things out of focus. I don't want things in focus. I want to use a part of my brain that doesn't use my foveal vision. That's the part of the brain that reads words. I'm not trying to read words. I'm trying to get a sensation here.
Yeah, also, what that does is it limits the amount of light your eyes are taking in. And essentially, the reason why a lot of artists do this is primarily to just read values. Values are your lights and your darks, everything in between. If you think of a value scale, it's gradient from dark to light. A lot of artists will squint their eyes so light creates color, and our eyes perceive color through our cones in the back of our eyes. And if you can limit the amount of color that's coming in, you can sort of isolate the darks and the lights. You're still going to be able to see some color, but you're just getting those those main shapes. You're getting those main shapes of value, and you're thinking in those terms. Now, Monet himself, he had cataracts, so he late in life, and so I'm sure he was squinting, just as all artists do, but his sort of way of seeing the world while he was painting was kind of naturally creating this sort of lack of detail, lack of color detail sort of thing happening. And an interesting thought or fact, I don't know if it's a fact or not, something I've heard, is that Rembrandt had glaucoma late in life, or middle-aged to later in his life. So that may have affected the way in which he painted as well.
And that means I can't focus on anything. And the squinting helps do that. It also heightens values.
Well, there you go. Heightens values. It also, what's working here, like he said, a lot of people would look at Monet's paintings and say, like, well, what is he even doing, sort of a thing. And you can look at this guy's painting and you're like, what is he even doing? So important to get your composition figured out early and get your values figured out early and your main colors figured out early, and then you bring the details. I mean, you can paint however you want, and if you're kind of a detail from the get-go type of painter, go for it. I've seen plenty of successful painters do that. But like, if you just want to learn kind of the basics of painting, try this out. I mean, it may even build your confidence. You may feel like, oh, okay, well, this isn't that hard, especially if you're painting organic shapes like water, lily pads, bushes, trees, things like that.
Now, the danger with the white paint is that if I mix more than a couple of colors in that white, it's subtractive mixing.
Yeah.
Less light, less color, less luminance gets back to the eye. And so the paintings look dingier and chalkier. He uses horizontal strokes like I'm using horizontal strokes, and vertical strokes. And it's this crosshatch pattern that gives you a sense of reflection. The colors and the reflections aren't as intense as the colors that are throwing the reflections. That's because light's bouncing off of the trees and the irises into the water. Now that's a chalky color. But here I want a chalky color. If it's against a strong color, then the contrast of something chalky vibrates.
Yeah.
The Impressionists painted with opaque colors.
Contrast
They weren't
of
as interested in glazing,
value.
putting colors side by side for effect. I'm going to scrub and pull out some lights and push some things around.
Yeah.
See the vertical and the lateral? That floats on top of the vertical. Now this...
Sorry, that was funny. I just like how you just kind of hesitated there for a second after he said that, just to kind of like look at us like, are you seeing this?
Out some lights and push some things around. See the vertical and the lateral? That floats on top of the vertical.
Huh? You see? Right?
Now this pink offers, and
if I'm making fun of this gentleman, I'm not doing it in any sort of mean-spirited way. I like the way he's explaining things, and I like his enthusiasm for this painting method. It's kind of inspiring. It kind of makes you feel like you could do it yourself too. He's also breaking down some complex ideas in a way that is sort of easy to understand.
Now this pink offers, and if I add a little yellow to it, more of a simultaneous contrast against the blue-green, and now the picture starts to jump as a stronger vibration. His canvas can show through in certain areas the threads and the texture of the canvas. In other areas, the paint is thick, just like the surface of this lily pond. Where the lilies are, there's a tactile topography, but where the water is, it's smooth.
Yeah.
These skylights that come through, and I'll do that.
That's nice.
Just dragging.
Yeah, lightly.
To get the shimmer and the feeling of a little movement because the water isn't still. I'm going to now float some things on the surface of this upside down world. Remember, he didn't paint the world upside down, he painted sensations that were visual.
Right.
Now I'm trying to get it just right because values are what's important here.
That's
if my
good.
values are too light or too dark, I won't have something that sits on the surface. Monet had an interesting piece of advice for all artists. The bigger the vocabulary of strokes, the more interesting the painting.
Yeah.
And it's the ambiguity of, is it on the surface? Is it underneath the surface? Which is what? Ambiguity heightens participation in the viewer. That's one of the things Impressionism discovers. You can project what you think you see. In the early 1870s, Monet and Pissarro go to London. They discover the light and experiments of Turner, how he uses atmosphere and how he dissolves edges. And they discover in the landscapes of Constable greens they'd never seen in paintings before. And it's that emerald green that becomes one of the keynote colors for the Impressionist palette.
Yeah, I mean, also that's cool. I like that these artists are trying these newer colors. I mean, colors were exploding at that point in time. It's so much easier to get colors, especially in tubes of paint. Not as easy earlier on. That's why you see that sort of delineation of eras, where it's like, oh, the Renaissance was a lot of earth tones, but then as we get into Impressionism and then in modern art and contemporary art, so much more color because you have so many more opportunities with color in tubes of paint. But I also I think that probably part of the use of greens and blues for Impressionist artists was just the fact that they were painting oftentimes scenes of nature. And when you think about Monet in particular, a lot of his scenes were of nature or people in nature, these fields of flowers and of grass and things and trees and the skies with the blue skies and white clouds and things. And
as the lilies go from larger to smaller, your perception of space is that it's going from forward to back.
Yeah.
That's perspective.
Perspective, yeah. Linear perspective.
A little bit
or
of
organic perspective.
In a glow, I'll amplify the pink. The
yeah.
pink is a complement to all this green, and I need complements. Otherwise, it's an analogous harmony, all blues and greens.
Really interesting the way he's painting. He's painting like he's bringing his brush forward as he's painting rather than like pulling on his brush. I mean, typically you see a painter pull on their brush or dab with their brush kind of in this direction with their arm going backwards kind of because it lays the paint much easier. Pushing creates texture and it also lessens control, I guess, or accuracy, precision. but it can create a lot of interesting texture. Now what he's talking about with the pinks contrasting against those cool colors, it's very true. But also he mentioned that he's really kind of emphasizing that pink. And I think this is smart. A lot of painters should do this, or maybe should consider doing this, especially if they're painting from photography. Photographs can often lose their luster of what you're actually seeing in life, because your camera is actually perceiving the light, the color spectrum in the electromagnetic field, the visible spectrum, and then it's having to convert that through RGB or sRGB or whatever. But in life, we have our own like color converters inside of our eyes, and we see much more of a range of the spectrum. And so in life, you don't have this issue, but as much. But if you just emphasize those colors just a little bit more, it can make it a little more interesting for your viewer, and it can make your painting feel a little bit more lively.
The yellows, the corals, the reds, they're the opposite. So that's why he puts them in. I lifted up the lip of that lily just to give you a greater sense of the surface.
Now he mentions that lifting up that lip of that lily, that's just, I mean, he's thinking in terms of, he's not speaking in technical terms, right? He's speaking sort of descriptively. But, and maybe that's a good way for somebody to understand, oh, okay, you've lifted up that lip, you've made that visible. Basically, all he's doing, he's finding that color, that shape of color, and he's laying that in there. And in essence, the way he's describing it is almost like a sculptor might, because in some ways, as a painter, you're just thinking about the forms and the planes of your objects, and you're trying to describe them, and oftentimes that really just comes down to bringing in those shapes of color and contrast.
We're hardwired to put things into symmetry. That's why I have this angling this way. Asymmetry creates an impression of more movement.
Yeah.
I'm creating a line that goes this way.
More visual interest usually, too.
To pull you back into that space.
Interesting. That method of painting forward is so strange to me.
The softer the edges, the more volume.
But everybody's different.
Edges, the less volume. What's called gradual transition. If you see something, a territory, that is transitioning very gradually, you think space, the sky, open water. If you see a territory that abruptly changes from gradual transition to an edge, you name it. We name and we identify on the basis of abrupt transitions. And Monet's interested in gradual transitions with a smattering of abrupt transitions, which you will call lilies.
Look at how bright Monet's white, or like white tinted lilies are. Like, look at his. We'll see if he brings some brighter, thicker paint. But look at how bright those are. It's very pastel, which, I mean, generally you try to avoid that too much, but you do need a little bit of that, because we do see things with that amount of brightness in reality.
Which you will call lilies. That's more opaque paint, a little overlapping, so that they float on the surface. We should keep his method in mind. The beginnings are where the feeling lies, where the impression lies. And that's what Corot had told Monet. Trust your first impression.
Use the force.
I'm going to take the tape off this painting now and see how it looks.
Yeah, that always is nice.
So it is for Monet, so it is for me. We'll stop with the beginning.
Nice. That's very nice. I enjoyed that. Let me back it up here, and we'll get a different view of me here. Not that that matters that much, but I enjoyed that video quite a bit. I think that the method of painting, feels so peaceful and nice. Feels so natural and organic. I would advise anybody to try using some of those techniques. And he made it look very easy. It's not as easy as he made that look. And of course, it's like an 8-minute video. It's never going to be that. I mean, he was probably there for a few hours filming this, maybe an hour. I don't know, but he worked pretty quickly. And you can too. I think there's a bit of experience necessary to build up to being able to do that, but also just kind of give yourself, if you want to paint like this, give yourself license to feel a little confident in making mistakes and just trying to apply the things you've learned in this video or in other videos or other readings or things, practices you've done. I enjoyed that a lot. It is inspiring to me. I like Impressionist art, and I like natural landscapes quite a bit. So that was fun. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned some things, and I'll see you next time.